Axis Cam back in the house. If you haven't seen his part 1, you're going to want to go back in time and check that out. You can find it in the podcast channels. Cam flew out to Vegas last night to do a part 2. Maybe there'll be a part 3. Cam, welcome back.
Thanks. It's awesome to be back in Vegas. This is easily one of my favorite cities to be in. Don't get me wrong. It's fun to be walking around Philly where there's literal shit in the streets. And that's a low bar, but Vegas, for all the debauchery and whatever, it's well above that. So I actually feel cleaner somehow coming to Vegas. It's a lot of fun.
Well, we got fucked up last night. I wish you would have been there.
I wish I was there because all I saw was it was fun though reading it over text because it was like the Sherlock Holmes of did Nick black out and then when did Nick black out. And it was great because you must just be like a super functional when you're blacked out because like people can figure it out. They're like, did he not?
It's been a while since I blacked out, but I felt myself fading. Somehow I never have any typos when I'm blacking out, which is like one of the weirdest things. I'm like very precise. It's also one of the reasons that I almost rationalized driving home. I remember feeling like I'm drinking white wine and then at some point, Alfredo started pouring like a lot of red wine.
Yeah.
And I remember that shifting into like, okay, I'm probably not driving home. And then I remember throwing up outside of my house thinking, I'm glad I didn't drive home. And then I walked into my house and my wife looked at me and she said, I'm really glad you followed the rule and didn't drive home. And then I blacked out.
It's tough. You blacked out. That's so
and then I remember nothing.
That's pretty sick. Yeah, no, it is tough when you've had a career being an elite poker player. You're a high performer, and relative to playing the biggest games in the world, hopping behind some fucking car and driving a couple miles seems pretty easy.
The rationalization is strong.
Absolutely. The discipline was stronger though.
Anyway, what was supposed to be a nice little squid barbecue, we never even played squid.
That sucks.
We drank way too much, but it was fucking hilarious and fun. Let's get into it. I got like 5 points that I think we should cover. This is more about capital intelligence than anything else. This particular pod, I would say. We're going to do a more deep dive into technical stuff in the next one, but I think what a lot of the Axis network, and if we do decide to release this public, what a lot of the public does not know about one of the main reasons for sunsetting PDCFP. We did that in 2025, and it was a shift towards smarter capital allocation.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of maturity in terms of capital intelligence that was occurring over the last 24 months inside of PD. You were a huge part of that. A lot of our conversations gravitated around these different areas of capital intelligence that we'll unpack today. Mm-hmm. Words like capital drag, capital velocity, site arbitrage, all of these things that we had to basically learn that are business concepts, but they get packaged within poker in a really weird way that like you wouldn't really understand unless you were in it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so Axis was built to deploy against those opportunities that we were seeing emerging in terms of like these new concepts, but with more precision than we were able to do with the CFP group. Mm-hmm. And that's structural more than anything.
Yeah.
So Black Ops MDA, which is your course, which will be launching within the month. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a direct reflection of that evolution that we were making on both the technical side and the capital intelligence side. So today I want to talk about the capital intelligence side.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The thing that I think Black Ops is doing and is probably going to do better than anyone is combining bankroll management and capital intelligence strategies with your strategy at the poker table because they're not completely separate. Something I talked about on the podcast last time was if you're, c-betting button versus big blind, if you just go quarter pot or check with, range, it costs you 0.6% of the pot. That lets you see more tables. That lets you catch them when they pop, get on more sites, yada, yada, yada. And a lot of that might seem obvious, but the mental shift that sort of led to me thinking about poker and even structuring strategic content in that way was how the capital allocation strategies are part of the poker investment. And I think when a lot of people think about how do I make more money in poker, it's just, oh, I gotta reduce, get a higher GCO wizard score. But that's like not the case at all. And one of the, I think when I first was brought in as a head coach, one of the big things I remember talking about is we can't depend on players to, and I said act in their own self-interest, but really it was to correctly balance the implications of bankroll capital with the games they're trying to play. So, for example, one of the things that Axis does really well is getting unique formats to a higher stake than is available anywhere else online. It's absolutely disgusting. So, when does playing those games make the most sense, right? It makes sense when you can actually afford to play them, right? Because you're taking huge swings and you're really restricted to a few tables if you're going to be very intentional about them, right? So, how does that work for players? How does that work for, Axis, right? It's the credit system. And as we talk about moving out of traditional backing and into the new era, which is Axis, so many things like capital drag, right? How long does it take to get money on and off a site? All those things. So much of that equation just vanished as soon as we saw we had access to credit. I mean, it really does. We were doing all these complex calculations. We'd meet with players once a month to say, hey, like, where do you have too much money? Where do you have too little? All this stuff and, spreadsheets for days. And then all of a sudden with the credit, it just blew it wide open.
Yeah. That was more an advantage from the company economics side. I think it definitely relates to the player's advantage too. Like, so let's paint the picture. So let's pretend we have a player who's playing across 5 public sites. And let's say he's a 1K&L player. He plays some 500 too. So he's probably going to need around 50,000 spread across each of those sites.
Yeah.
And that's like a thin load.
Yes.
That's like 10 buy-ins per each site.
Yeah.
So when we started looking at like how much money was trapped in the guys that we were fronting funds on backing deals for, it starts to just look very bad relative to being able to have credit on apps. Because anybody who knows what capital drag is in a normal business setting knows that it is basically the enemy of ROI.
Yeah.
Because you can't do anything with that money when it's locked up. And the poker player is not playing all day. So like there are hours where that money just sits there.
And to take it a step further, not only that, so if you have like 10K on a site, right, and you have, let's say, 400 or 500 NL tables, so not only is the money not in action when you're not actively playing that, but any money that you have in the account that is not actively on the tables is actually drag, right? So even if you're like, man, I play on this site all the time, whatever, it's like, is the full 10K on the site the whole time? Because if it's not, you have drag.
Yeah. So drag was like a huge thing that started to make us really question the staking model. There are a few guys who we still stake after like the final transition of PD. And I don't think there's maybe there might be one guy who plays enough and wins enough that we front the capital for. But the big transition was we will still back you, but we won't be fronting capital.
Yeah.
We'll settle with you weekly, which is sort of what happens like in Axis now.
Yeah.
But fronting the funds just makes the economics of that whole model way worse. And that's even before you factor in liabilities.
That was bananas. I did not think it was possible to see some of the shit that came through the exec chat in terms of, very high stake. I mean, guys like I, even looked up to coming through the pipe that then it turned out to be huge liabilities for the company. It's bananas. And I think that when guys look at traditional backing, they think like, oh, well, this is great. I can get over, 100% ROI year over year. It's like, yeah, but that guy gets in more makeup than their people never vanish when things are going great. Yeah. Right. So projecting from the good times and assuming how someone responds to variance or a heavy downswing, like, I mean, when we just got caught with that, I mean, we had some guys who'd been on the team for years that we just never saw it coming. Yeah. It's one of the main reasons we moved away from makeup models specifically for high stakes guys. I'm probably going to do an entire pod on why makeup deals aren't as good as they look and why players are probably usually getting better deals than they even realize. But that's for another day. Take me through the core misunderstanding
that you'd say most poker players have when they're thinking about bankroll management? Because I feel like we're sort of circling it with this capital drag, capital allocation, but you were the first one who really came into PD and looked at it ground up as a player and then as a coach. And you're like, guys, the players aren't able to figure this out for themselves. And we're assuming that they are allocating their money properly. It was you that really blew that wide open and said, we need to actually just revamp this thing from the ground up.
Yeah. So I put pen to paper on optimal bankroll management. And the thing that I guess one of the principles for online poker is the higher each stake you go up, it runs, I don't think it's quite the right term, but like exponentially less. So it's not like 500 NL runs half as much as 200, it runs even less. So you get that smaller and smaller availability for each game. And then on top of that, I'll make sure we get this right here. Like smaller, the games get tougher too. So your win rate actually goes down, right? So the game will run less than half as often, and you will have a slightly diminished win rate. It's still a higher EV to play the higher game, but you have a diminished win rate. So with that, in a model where let's say a person could play an infinite number of sites, infinite number of tables, you're actually incentivized to play the lowest stake possible, like at infinite, because you have the highest ROI, you have the highest win rate, but we can't put in infinite volume. So effectively, I'm just leaking black. Like this is actually all just ripped from like one of our opening lectures. Like this is financial sit downs with players. What we call the minimum stake model gets broken down. We should not even be giving this away.
Tell me about the minimum stake model, because it's what you're basically outlining when you're giving these pen to paper calcs around the win rate. So you ended up coming up with what you coined minimum stake model, and you basically broke down the exec's door one day when we were in a meeting. We're like, guys, like, we can't talk about what you guys want to talk about today because this is the more important revenue generating discussion. We need to get minimum stake dialed. What is it?
It is the mathematical principle that because of diminishing returns for higher stakes, you're incentivized to spread liquidity across more sites to play as much volume as the lowest as you can at your set stake. So let's say one player is able to play 500 NL and 1K on a site. So he has maybe 5,000 on the site, right? And he'll play a certain amount of 500 NL, have that great 500 NL win rate. And then sometimes the 1K will pop and he'll get to play that. Now, when you play that, you get to make more, but not so much more because your win rate's lower and also doesn't run that often. So it's more, what's higher EV is instead of saying I'm gonna have 5K on this site so I can play 1K and 500, is to take 2,500, move it to another site. Now you have two sites with 500 NL. You have a higher, you raise your average, your average stake is lower, but it's compensated by the volume. So as soon as you max out your volume, now you start to put more money on each site and then do that recursively. But what a lot of guys will do is they'll look at online poker and say, oh, well, I want to reach 2K. I want to reach 5K. This all sounds sick. But if you're not spreading your liquidity so that way you can maximize your hourly, you're really just a worse poker player than the guy who says, I want to feel good about playing huge games when they pop. So it's really just building that base, having as narrow a range of stakes as possible, spreading sites until you run out of action, then find more sites and keep moving up and keep moving through that process. So like early on, playing 200 NL, it's not that hard to start to execute, right? It's like there's lots of 200 NL in action. Maybe you need to be on two sites, cool. And then you hit that point where it's like, okay, I've found all the 200 NL. I'm maxed out on my volume. Now you get to say like, what about 500 NL? And all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, like I don't have enough action for raising my minimum stake to 500 NL. Then you find another few sites and do that recursively until next thing you know, you're regularly playing with 10K on the table. And it's pretty sick.
It has such an impact on hourly that a single player, when they hear this, they might not even realize how important this is, especially the type that's more strategically focused.
Yeah.
I'm talking like they're worried about their win rate. It's not something that really comes naturally for players to think about this for themselves. And we didn't even realize how important it was for the company at scale until we started looking at your numbers and we're like, holy shit, it actually does increase hourly by a lot. If someone
like
follows
20%
this
or more, it's disgusting what these things do. Yeah.
So if you tell someone that, like, there is a way to increase your annual earnings
Yes.
as a poker player by 20% without getting better at poker next year. Strategically.
Yeah.
That sounds crazy that there's that much delta from just making an adjustment to, I mean, the logistics of how you allocate across sites. But that's a real thing. And like, it just doesn't appear to a player who's not either thinking in the way that you do about the game or trying to arrange economics at scale, which we had to really start looking at.
Yeah.
Like we couldn't ignore it anymore. It was like, well, what the hell's going on? Because like the ROI is not high enough. So where is it?
There was also this really funny moment where when we started implementing the minimum stake model, where I had like talked to the team and be like, so, you know, because in the contract we say this is the rate at which you move up in stakes, but those rates were not with the minimum stake model. So I had to sit down with guys and basically be like, listen, you're going to be playing smaller stakes than you expected, and you're going to be making way more money. And it was just a really funny conversation and so inverted. I also think that in poker, when like really common course content is around, you know, getting better and then mindset. And I think it's interesting how people will go, oh, mindset, hugely important. It's an off the table thing, helps you execute, blah, blah, blah. But things like managing money or, you know, bankroll management, fitness, whatever it is, these things often I think get slid under the rug, the more mechanical things. And like there's stuff that I think if, you know, for people who are watching, like they can implement today. So for example, if a site allows you to deposit immediately and you just have some of that money on hand, you're better served to just keep the minimum on that site and then reload as needed, presuming the withdrawals like come out quickly. But I think, you know, the guy who, I think when it was interesting when you said like, you know, without adjusting things strategically, you would be able to unlock more money. I'd almost argue that the guy who steps back and looks at the big picture of, you know, financial allocation and sees like poker, well, it's measured in dollars, it's measured in hourly, it's measured in these things, is probably the better poker player than the guy who doesn't know how to scale the EV he's gaining when he's drilling sims.
I think it just depends how you define poker player. And most people probably define it as in what's my win rate and how good am I technically. We've been doing these archetype quizzes. It's one of the new things that we'll be releasing with Elliot soon. You'll start to see it pop up. But the funnel for this is basically, let's start by identifying your archetype. We found like 6 or 7 of them that like a lot of the top players fall into one of these 6 or 7. And then what we did is basically start giving it to more people and being like, okay, you're going to fall into one of these. You might not be as evolved as the top player who's solved all of the immature responses that you have to solve as that archetype matures. But we can at least show you, hey, you're wired in this way.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who took it all the way with your same wiring. Let's see what the beliefs are that you need to patch up where you're currently leaking, where your mindset is currently leaking. We can solve all those and you'll end up being this top guy with your same archetype. So I'm prefacing that because one of the archetypes is called the capitalist. And the capitalist correlates with a lot of top guys. Technician and capitalist, I think, are the strongest correlation with top players, these archetypes. Capitalist, I would say, is a lot about understanding capital intelligence. It's understanding like, okay, where I allocate my funds and how I use that dimension of strategy is as important, if not more important, than my win rate. And a lot of guys who discovered private and went all in on private are capitalists.
Yeah.
Which shouldn't be that surprising, I guess.
Poker is measured in dollars. Like that's the game. Like the original poker was played trying to scam sailors, right? Like that is how it started. And then they added more and more rules. There was no turn or river at the start. It was these guys who were, you know, sailing over from wherever, starting to figure this thing out. It's time to make it crazier. So I'll give this example. So I'm working with or studying with a guy who he's an unbelievable player. He's made, you know, hundreds of thousands in some of the toughest pools. And I was just talking to him about his bankroll management. He's like, oh, I'm on a couple sites. And I'm like, why? And he goes, well, I'm more concerned about getting better. He's a top 100 player in the world. He's good. He's got it figured out. And we were just talking. He's like, yeah, I want to check out these different, coaching paths, whatever. And I was like, well, why do you want to do this? He goes, well, I want to be technically amazing and play against the best. And I was like, well, from your financial situation right now, like you're out on all the sites you could be. He's not playing on as big as possible on all the public, sites. So somewhere, whether it be Matt Marinelli, Linus, whoever, are all battling it out in some crazy 5K game that, people are going to make YouTube shorts about, that are going to become the stuff of legend. And he doesn't have the bankroll to be part of those. And I was like, well, how does that make you feel sort of knowing that? And he's like, well, it doesn't feel great. It's like, okay, cool. So doesn't it seem pretty important to just be playing like crazy, try to scale your capital so that way you can be in those awesome moments where you get to show off that you're a technician? And then it started to get through. So I think a lot of these archetypes come from, or that don't result in even considering capital allocation, come from a misunderstanding of how the game is measured. And then also what it takes to be able to do those awesome things. Like if you can hang with Marinelli and you have $100 in the bank, it doesn't matter. You got to get your seat at the table so that way you can do really cool things in really big spots.
I think a lot of these guys are putting cart in front of the horse. It seems like, at least, like it doesn't connect that they're going to need more money to play the types of games that they want to play, but they don't know how to go make the money as efficiently as possible by doing the site allocation stuff. So it ends up being this loop. And it's actually surprising to me that it took us so long to do a formal pod about this, because like we were doing staking for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of like, we had bankroll management modules and all that stuff, but like to see the amount of players who were leaving money on the table by not actively doing this stuff for themselves was disappointing from a observational standpoint of like, oh damn, we were managing these guys. Like we were disappointed in ourselves too. As the exec team, it was like we actually just assumed something to be true that just wasn't natural for the player to do for themselves.
If you were to try to find optimal bankroll management for high stakes players, there's just not like a lot of content. It doesn't really get talked about that much. And a lot of the guys who reach that level and knows what it takes to scale really want it to be lonely at the top. Like those guys aren't incentivized at all to be coaching people. So that way more regs can take that seat, at the 5K table with the fish. That's horrible. Yeah.
Walk me through what it looks like with how you're training Black Ops MDA students. If they come in ground up, how does that initial consultation look when you review their site logistics, their capital allocation? Is that the first thing, or are there strategic consults before that? Like, how do you prioritize this when you have a new player come in?
So there's three ideals. So there's ideally 3 stages. So the first stage is you get your stuff, get your shit together technically. So if you're not playing in a way that is not only winning but scales, that's going to be a big problem. And the game also needs to be in a state where I can diagnose things. I remember having a player who his a certain line was heinously underbluffed. And it's one of the lines I've studied the most, I know the most about, and I could not figure out where the heck his bluffs were going. And then he goes, oh, well, sometimes I'll check him on the flop. And it's like, great. Now I don't know how to diagnose this thing at all, because now it's gotten exponentially harder to see where things are going. So it's not even about like if someone is playing incredibly well, it's can I get your game to a point where it's consistent enough I can even look at your database and be able to provide insight as to where some of your leaks are occurring. So that's the biggest thing. The next thing is if a person doesn't have a comfortable base to work with. So minimum stake is not like 500 in an L yet, which would be a very big problem. It's go to places where your edge is sure, do the same thing over and over, pump the volume, make it happen, get your good base. And then after that, once you have that base and you can recover from things, now other things like stacks games or squid or sushi really, really become compelling. Places where relative edges are bigger than ever. The games are huge and you need that ability to bounce back, right? Like how much more appealing is it to work with a player who with Squid, if you know that they take a 40K loss, they'll bounce back in a month or two.
Yeah.
Right. It's incredible. So it's all about skill set, getting that base. And within the base, I would say also, even if you aren't quite studying a format, there's spots that are amazing, extremely high ROI, those get in there too. But the goal is to build that foundation for because the bigger the game, this through high stakes private, right? The softest games in the world are the highest stakes. It's building that foundation so that way you can fire those things and then make as much money as possible.
Without getting too into the weeds with strategy, I want to return to the initial diagnostic.
Yeah.
Because I think it's interesting that you were one that I think if you put you in a room of coaches, you would be the one sort of holding all of the other MDA coaches accountable and being like, you're full of shit, you're full of shit, you're full of shit, because there's no way that you can provide a consistent diagnosis for what's happening with this player if this player is doing all of this random stuff on flop, turn.
Yeah.
Without getting too into the weeds, how did you come to the level of conviction that I think you're at now, where you'll basically say because we're in rooms with a lot of MDA coaches, and we have basically, roundtable meetings. Most of them we're aligned with, but there's this thing that you do in these conversations that when I'm observing and I'm like, it's pretty hard to fuck with Cam's position. And I haven't really heard many coaches who can hold their own with you when the topic goes to this place. Do you know what I'm about to say next?
I might. We'll see.
It's around making sure that the player is even playing consistent enough lines for you to examine it in the first place as an MDA engineer.
Yeah.
Or someone reviewing the database. So talk to me about how that works and how you started to discover that there's a bigger problem here if we don't at least get them into some type of consistent line execution.
It's strategic accountability, because this is another streamer special, which is you'll see guys stream and they'll go, oh, I could big better check here, I'm going to check this time. And then if you've been watching for an hour, you're like, boy, he sure is checking a lot. And then all of a sudden it's nowhere near, what theory would be, even though in his mind he's, doing rolling, being, behaving intelligently, all this stuff. So with a amount of effectively zero EV regret standardization, we can funnel people to enough spots consistently that we can actually isolate what's wrong. It's a engineering principle that unless a process is repeatable, it literally cannot be evaluated. That is, so I'm a graduated industrial engineer. That is smashed into our heads from day one till, you graduate. So in poker, that's not nearly as standard, where data points such as, I feel like this guy donks nutted, or this thing is, I feel like that. To an engineer's ears, those things do not qualify. Those start the investigative process for what could be a valid data point, but they aren't the end all be all. So in terms of adjusting play based on reads, there's 3 key types of reads. The first is scientifically grounded. The second is probabilistic. The third is white magic. Now, white magic is a lot of fun. It has a place, but this is clearly separating these is where I think I separate myself from a lot of other engineers. So a data-driven strategy means that if you were to write a scientific paper on this exploit you're about to execute, that you would 100% be able to, you could submit it to a journal and then it would go, yep, looks like Johnny's always bluffing or whatever. You have clear bounds for distributions. You've run it through a hypothesis test, and that whole process to an engineer takes less than a minute. It's not too bad, but that's tier 1. That's the biggest one. The next one is a probabilistic read. So probabilistic means that you observed something that may not pass the full hypothesis test, but might still be indicative of making an adjustment. So for example, if you have someone you're playing with, and he's a good reg, you have an extended sample of him being a stable good reg, and then he 3-bets you 4 times in a row. That's something where if you take the whole distribution, you would say, will I be 4 or 3-bet 4 times in a row at some point? Absolutely. But is there a lot of potential that this is a short-term meta adjustment? Yes, That's your probabilistic read. White magic is, this guy had, seems angry today or something. So I'm gonna, but that's actually like kind of okay. But you can draw some behavioral things from that. But like maybe, so I refer to my white magic as the spirit to be like, the spirits tell me this 3-bet slide. I can't tell you why, but it just feels like it.
Mm-hmm.
So what'll happen is people will stack probabilistic assumptions into a spot and to make plays. And the problem with that is each probabilistic assumption you stack is less likely to be true. So you get guys who are like, well, I think it's bad to put in the spot here because of X, Y, and Z. And it's like, yeah, but X is true 50% of the time. Y, can't put a number on that. And Z is like, it's kind of ambitious to think that. And that's how people get in these rabbit holes of making poor decisions.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that separates me from MDA, so that's one side of, I would say, the MDA engineers I butt heads with, is the threshold for scientific for making an adjustment is much higher for me than most because I have that background in industrial engineering, because I know what it means to run hypothesis tests that could be in a journal. And I know of the dangers of stacking probabilistic data when you go too many layers deep.
Mm-hmm.
The other area where I would say I butt heads is most MDA guys, I don't think, know as much about theory as they should. So when the Sentinel pod captures came out, and this was when I was first when I was first within PD, it was like, okay, you win 35% of the pot here with a bet. And I'm like, okay, that's great. So, and I'm looking at my sim, and I'm like, okay, so I'm putting I'll bluffing all these types of hands.
This would be if you had an exploitative bluff opportunity.
Yes.
And you bluffed it, and you could expect the overfold to result in a 35% pot capture.
Exactly. Yep. So I was like, oh, well, I should bluff all these hands. And then I would get the feedback. It's like, you can, but you're going to be way out of line. Right. And that's the thing that most MDA engineers don't have a great grasp on, is they know there's an overfold here. They know you can, run someone over. They know people over defend here. But tying that back to how's the spot supposed to look is what gets lost. So, for example, a MDA engineer with no technical background would look at a spot where you're 3-bet pot, out of position, pre-flop razor. You go bet, check. An MDA engineer would go, dude, that's a crazy hot spot. We should just be freaking launching. The pot capture, in theory, is even higher. So the 3-bet pot, the 3-bet pot out of position PFR, bet, check, is one of the highest hotspots we have. I think it's number 1 or number 2. And compared to theory, it is over defended. So if you take an MDA engineer who doesn't know, he's looking at the sim and sees like, oh, well, the sim isn't bluffing low pair here, but we can because there's such a big hotspot. That's just objective. We should be going tighter in all those spots. So until you can tie a lot of those fold equity MDA principles to, but what does this even look like in theory, you're going to be making a lot of mistakes. And it's not even, people don't know what they don't know, right? So you're just kind of shooting in the dark for how out of line are we? How do we adjust in tougher games? Because if you can't tie it back to baseline, you're just in a chaos land.
You were one of the first ones to start holding engineering relatively accountable in these zones. I would say that's like sort of the right word for this, because what you're doing there, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you're looking at how the spot models against theory.
Yes.
And you're saying, like, even though it looks like we have an exploitative pot capture here, if that pot capture also exists in theory, it's not relatively as big as you think.
No. Yeah.
Is this the right way of saying
absolutely
this? And like, let's do another example here, because I really want the audience to be able to track.
Yeah.
And you talk through that hand history like pretty fast. So like, let's go through this, like starting on the river. Show me a scenario where a common mistake would be made if someone weren't as diligent as you are scientifically to be able to spot this relative comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. This would be the biggest problem with blanket MDA is and pot captures and fold equity, which is within a line, different board textures will have different amounts of pot captures. So I looked at the 3-bet pot in position, pre-flop caller, call bet opportunity, river reports. And there's times where you are checking back ace high, and there are times where you're blasting with 4th pair. So in the times you blast with like 4th pair and stuff, the pot capture is significantly higher in that realm. So if the textural breakdowns beyond the average aren't represented somewhere, and I know that it has to be represent, we have to look at the theory reports because the sample sizes break down. For if you're doing MDA, we've done Detox has been great about acquiring so many freaking hands to the point where it's excessive. If the hands are out there, we've seen them. We don't have enough hands to do the nuanced texture by texture. So to give an example of this, one of the engineering projects that we greenlit was looking at pot capture variance. So in that spot where you have 50% pot capture on average, the 95% confidence interval, so that's like 95% of the points fall within this range, was about 5% and 95%. So the average was not that helpful, right? Because if it could, average is, so if like, as an example, right? So let's say you always choose the average, it can only ever be 5% or 95%. You're always going to be wrong.
Yeah.
So it's taking things at face value is very helpful. It's very helpful to know that there are overfolds in theory that you can be leveraging, but not having access to reports with the nuance, it will, and with that information and that there's huge overfolds on average, that is helpful. You will make more money, but you'll have some zones where you are punting with hands with a tremendous, trying to bluff hands with a tremendous amount of showdown value because that nuance hasn't been broken down anywhere. The average isn't enough. There's too much nuance.
As a player is gaining that new understanding around how to navigate what I would call like sort of ancient MDA hotspots with this more evolved gradient.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I think is like what you really bring to the table when you're meeting a guy who doesn't have that type of flexibility in how he thinks about MDA, specifically like when he's analyzing a hand.
Yeah.
And this is what I want to get into, like the standard that you hold yourself to as an engineer, I've noticed puts you at a level in a conversation, because we've been in a lot of them, where I can be like, Cam is not going to allow that comment to not be challenged in this conversation. And you said this on the last pod too, but it's I think it may be the most important thing, like along the lines of like, you are the average of your 5 best friends.
Yeah.
You are the average of the 5 people you speak hands with most often.
Yeah.
And if the 5 guys who you're talking hand histories with don't hold you to like a pinnacle level of accountability with the type of shit you get away with saying, like, I think you know how intolerant I am of this at this stage. Like, and I'm at a point where like, I only will sit in a conversation with fucking top guys.
Yeah.
Because I just can't handle it anymore. If I hear one thing that hasn't been scrutinized from a level of humility that meets the standard, you should say scientifically or emotionally, I don't really care how you get there, but like there's certain shit that if you say it at a table with top guys, you have to leave the table. And I would like people, and I know that sounds like kind of harsh, but like,
no, it's,
people don't understand that top guys have no time for this shit anymore. They don't have time to be in a conversation with players who are trying to work an assumption into a hand history analysis that doesn't belong there. And so I don't say it to scare anyone from training at that level, because that's what Black Ops ultimately gets you to. And like a big part of your training program is like having the tolerance to get them there. And God bless you, because I don't have it anymore. Like,
well, I've found that my favorite line to irritate students is saying the magic was within you the whole time. It's so much fun. The 2 components of great hand history analysis are falsifiability of data points and then logical efficiency. So the best thought, so talking about logical efficiency first. So I was looking at a spot with a student, and it was a spot where it was a less common line. Even when he was talking through, it's like, man, I don't know what bluffs I have to work with, so I'm going to put in this bluff without great removal. I think I want to be balanced here, all this stuff. And I just said, hey, what's your hand class? He's like, bluff. Okay. Is there a hot spot here? No. Cool. We're done. And that's it. And there was 15 minutes of discussion precluding that.
Mhm.
And that was it start to finish. So and when I say efficiency, I do mean like, what is the least amount of data points to arrive at a airtight logical model? Because, not only in the post is that very valuable for saying like, okay, this is what we can take away. This is what we observed. When you're in game and you have a significant portion of your role on the table and you have the option to make that huge bet or call that huge bet, you want to be already practiced in defaulting to simple thought processes, because complexity adds more room for error. So if you can get to the same place in a half as mentally taxing spot, right? If the fish wanted you to do shots with him earlier, you're going to be more likely to make that right play. And that's like a huge freaking deal. Or you can go that extra 2 hours with the fish. The falsifiability element is huge because so in engineering, we call it the null hypothesis. So null meaning the opposite. So if I said, I think the sky is blue, the null hypothesis would say, all right, let's go prove that is any other color than blue. And then you break it down, you crunch the numbers, and you're like, I just can't prove the thing isn't blue. And then you arrive at that spot. And the reason that's important is because whatever you look for generally in data, you can find some evidence of it. You can find some trails of this, that, and the other. And it's like, is this guy over bluffing? Well, he bluffed me back in 07. You find the data, right?
Mhm.
But it's until you say, well, is it possible that the opposite, could be true, right? So all the data that goes into great hand history analysis. So for example, if you say there's an aggregate hotspot here, I think this guy fits the average. Knowing that there's a hotspot there is something that you've already done the scientific process through. So it's not something you do every time. It's you get those key data points, those unfalsifiable data points, store them up, then lock them away. And this also goes for player-specific exploits. So off the table work, right? I'll go through and I'll see who's over bluffing, who's under bluffing, who's over folding, who's under folding. And when I go into battle and I have that spot where I can bluff or bluff catching, whatever it is, I can say I have this unfalsifiable data point that I can call upon. And if I'm doing this in post and someone says, hey, why did you slow down here with what would be a mandatory bluff? I can say, oh, got this thing. Unfalsifiable data. He's over defending here. And that's like seriously powerful. But what you said about the importance of having the right group of friends. So in the example where someone said, man, when he donks, he bets small here, whatever, it's overly nutted, right? If you have great friends, they'll go, how do you know that?
Mhm.
And then a conversation will start and it'll be like, oh, wow, like 3 times he's made that move, he has had the nuts. That's like a disgusting distribution. Or they'll go, man, you really can't prove that at all. Like what other, how are you making your assumptions? But the worst thing that can happen is someone just says, oh, well, it's overly nutted. Then it's good you folded your bluff catcher.
Mhm.
That on a loop in an echo chamber is the most destructive thing for someone's game.
100%. The overly agreeable friend.
It's the worst. You need friends who go, you need friends who go, you're so smart, so it's confusing you said something so dumb. That's what you need.
You're way too smart to make such a speculative statement.
Mhm.
I mean, I could talk about this with you all day. I'd like to go a little bit further into the hand history analysis side of it, because it really does come down to that. Like, if we were to measure two players, the way that we would do it, we'd put a bunch of hand histories on the table that they analyzed, and we'd say which one's more logically consistent.
Mhm.
It's like two parts. It's like, part of it is, did they memorize the principles
Mhm.
that allow them to navigate course content effectively?
Yeah.
And then the second half is like, are they organizing that information in a logically consistent way, or are they squeezing in pre-existing assumptions that they've brought to the table before they joined this program, and that they haven't really like eliminated a lot of that?
One of the scariest things and toughest things for me to spot as a coach is when students will come in with their assumptions and it'll seem like it's going well, like, oh, they're jiving with this, doing well with that. They haven't tackled this other thing yet, but I'm sure they'll get to it. And they will use whatever piece of the course content they see that coincides with what they already believe in order to and just not develop. Like, let's say someone is terrified to bluff, right? The person off the bat might be like, oh, well, these are all the spots I can't bluff. And then I'm coaching. I'm like, oh, it's great. You're nailing these spots you're not supposed to bluff. But they're not really getting better. They just have gravitated and pointed out the things that they would already be doing that fits within their vision of the game. And then all of a sudden, all these other things start to break down. So it really has to be for a student to really absorb everything, there really has to be an open-mindedness and an acknowledgement that if you're going into poker, like, it is a data science problem.
I think what they would say is that they're doing it on instincts.
Yeah, instincts are, yeah.
And there's a place for that, but it does need to be balanced with the discernment that I think only an MDA program can offer.
Yeah.
When I think about these two categories of guys that will apply for Black Ops, like, I want to make it very clear who this program is not for.
Yeah.
There's a particular neurosis that I think the type of player who's not a good fit for MDA in general has. I'd like to take us back a few years, maybe 4 or 5 years at this point, when we put out Ether, which was the first public product that my younger brother Patrick created. It was a PD collab, but it was a public pack, and it was basically a bluff catching almanac.
Yeah.
So for the first time, you had textures listed, lines, formations, textures, and you could see this is an overbluffed zone from either a reg profile or a recreational profile. And we thought it was great. Maybe it was. And there was a lot of people who I think got a lot of value out of being able to just like open the almanac and flip to the spot. And then they would find the spot that gave them, you know, that caused the confusion in the session. They're like, okay, great. Now I've upgraded that spot, and rinse and repeat. The problem was that when we put that product out, the buyers were forked into two very clear categories. There were the guys who could look at the patterns available, and then when they get into battle, they could extrapolate without breaking down mentally. And then there was the second group that was like perfectionist, neurotic, which is like, as soon as the pattern changes from what I studied in the almanac, I don't know how to calibrate here. And we started to see like this group is just untrainable for MDA. Now there's a couple of reasons for that, and maybe they're not as important as this main point. The main point is that Patrick ended up realizing at some point, I think he's on record saying this, some people should just not be playing poker. But I think the way he meant it was like, you probably shouldn't be playing unless you already have a scientific preference. But some people can't even establish a real scientific preference because they fundamentally distrust data. And this was a real thing that like Patrick and I weren't really prepared for, because like, as someone who comes from a scientific background, it's very hard to step outside of your own paradigm and be like, wow, there's certain people who don't care about data. Like they're actually totally fine with making decisions that are underpinned by assumptions that would get laughed out of any scientific courtroom. They're fine with this. Similarly, it was very hard for me as someone who like, you know, is maybe as philosophical as I am, that like, there are people who don't care about truth. It's a very similar thing. On like poker, to me, if we compare it to life, is basically like, if you're a truth seeker in life, you're going to be a fucking MDA guy in poker. I can guarantee you that, because it's the same thing. It's like, are we getting to the heart of this? Or are we just jerking ourselves off? And trying to gain narrative control over other people by convincing them that our truth is more true than yours. That's what I think MDA actually represents. It is for the truth seeker who comes into this landscape wanting to understand more about how my personal assumptions interface or overlay onto an environment that is a game, but where you can also make a lot of money if you purify your assumptions. So I know that's kind of a dovetail, but like it's a bit philosophical, but like this guy who distrusts data is going to have a very fucking hard time getting better at poker unless his instincts are truly dialed.
Well, and this is the scary thing, is a lot of guys who, and I think you saw this a lot with a lot of older school poker players, is when the instincts are, so it, you know, instinct is informed by anecdote, right? So it's going to, no matter what, there are going to be some leaks within that. But the scariest thing is when a guy has a strategy, he's operating on instinct, and it stops working, right? And this, I think happened to a lot of people, especially post Black Friday, right? Where they were just doing a certain thing, it was working, and they're like, "Great, I'm instincting it up, I'm doing great." And then all of a sudden, win rates drop, market gets tougher, and there's no way to. The problem with instinct is there's no way to come back if it stops working, because it's instinct is right. It's you can't. So you can enhance your instinct by like what drilling intentional study. This is saying this would be in a model where someone's just shown to the tables and that's their only source, of study. It's just the instinct or whatever I think this guy's going to do. If it stops working, you can't coach your way out of that. It's actually just, toast. But if MDA stuff stops working, right, we can pull up samples and we can say like, hey, it looks like the overfold is intact across the board, but we found these few exceptions. Slow down versus player A, B, and C. And you're actually going to be making even more versus the rest. So actually dial it up a bit versus there. And now we have this really cool separation of things. So when things stop working with instinct, there's almost nowhere to go. But with MDA and data, it's like, let's go find some edge. And it becomes this very exciting thing almost when people feel they might have found exceptions, or at least it gets very exciting within, the container.
So these people who don't trust data, most of them just bounce off anything that they stumble upon that's MDA related before they even get into the loop. I want to put a caveat here that there's a specific type of person who doesn't trust data, who ends up being a menace inside of a data-driven community.
Yeah.
This doesn't happen often, but I do want to lay this out because like part of this is like who this is going to be a good fit for. So if you are this guy, don't apply for this program. That's my preface. I'm going to outline this new guy. This isn't the guy who doesn't trust data. This is the guy who thinks he trusts data. Okay. Or maybe he even believes that he does.
Yeah.
But when push comes to shove and shit doesn't go right, he's the first one to say to the engineer, could you take me into the back end so I can see how this looks? Now, here's the issue with that. You can take that guy in, and we've done this before.
Yes.
But the ridiculous part about how this guy's brain is wired is that he doesn't have a scientific background.
Yeah.
And so even if we show you how we cooked the data, you're still going to have to make an assessment as to whether or not we did it right, but based on what?
Another thing that I've noticed is the players that play the most volume are the least susceptible to short-term changes. One of our highest volume, highest earning players in the past, I asked like, why do you play so much volume? He goes, because I'm terrified of variance. So the guys who play a lot understand that whatever happens in a session is almost irrelevant. It's nonsense. It's noise. Even just how well you run over 6 months in 3-bet pots can unbelievably alter your win rate. So a lot of the distrust of data, I think, also comes from guys who hyper focus on spots or don't have a great picture of what the true EV exchanges of the spot. So as an example, right? Your 3-bet pot in position, pre-flop caller, you have the opportunity to call the triple barrel for a stack. It'll feel very terrifying. It'll feel like, oh my God, like I can lose, 100 big blinds. But guys who have that math background know when he makes that bet, you've already lost the pot. If he's overbluffed or underbluffed, unless this guy is a fool, which he's not because you're stewing about this, he's going to be imbalanced slightly one way or the other. So the margin here is thin. And then if they call and lose, which is supposed to happen most when you call, they're like, oh my God, I don't trust this, right? So I think it's not only do I trust data, it's do you understand the math of the game and then how inconsequential a lot of these spots that feel bad are. The best players who play the most, those spots just go, whoop. They're like, that was a whatever, this guy's close to balance, big spot, whatever.
That's the trait. I would define it as low neurosis. A simpler way of putting it might be like they don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
But in order to not sweat the small stuff, you have to know that it's small.
Yeah.
And there is something very difficult for a lot of players that they can't wrap their head around the idea that losing a big pot might not have actually contained any real margin had you done it differently.
Yeah.
Like that's just something that they haven't been able to really accept in their world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't accept that, you have no shot at being someone who doesn't sweat the small stuff, because every pot will seem like you're fighting for, you know, your life.
It's also the obsession with all in EV versus the green line, right? So, you know, let's say you have, you know, kings in a 4-bet pot, you triple it off in a standard spot, get looked up by aces, and you're like, you know, that sucks.
Mm.
Or if you know, end up, if the guy with the aces or whatever jams on you, call it off pre, you know, and then you get stacked that way, you all of a sudden have no exchange of EV either way. It doesn't matter. You went post, you played perfect. You were going to play perfect with the run out of the cards, and or you just get it in pre. And there is absolutely no strategy had no place really in either of those pots, unless you really, you know, want to mess it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, you know, what are the spots that really matter? So within the MDA syndicate, what we have done is we've looked at the top 40 lines that are that are the highest EV for value betting. And then on that, we've filtered for the lines that have the most nuance. So a high nuance line might be button versus big blind, bet, check, bet, because there's margin there. But if you take it too far, good players can't adjust to you. So some of these spots where the pot is huge and it does look scary, we have some of the data to say you should just never bluff that.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is one where you should just always give up. And it seems, and you're getting stacked, and that's where the most chips are being swung around. But it's actually some of these other zones where we have more exploitative edge, where our opponents might be able to adjust to us, where we really want to carefully execute that strategy. On the top list of the top 40 lines, not a single line is a 4-bet pot. Some of the best studied folks we had at, you know, at Detox, one of the guys, his catchphrase was, "I will never study a 4-bet pot." Just like so funny. He's like, "I will run that proto until I die. And if someone shows me the EV, I'll change my ways. But until then, I'm not studying things that don't make me money." And I do think that's beautiful.
I like that. Talk to me a bit about what formats you specialize in with this particular program and what you're doing to keep pace with the evolution of where the environment seems to be going, the poker ecosystem, specifically online, which is to these ante structures. I mean, we've seen it already happening with WPT.
Yes.
More and more, we're seeing even public sites start to drift towards ante. And then we know the apps has more of the warped formats. How are you planning on layering in more expanded formats?
So having played in Vegas, some, you know, 10, 20, 40 with the big blind ante, or 10, 20 with the big blind ante. The thing I noticed the most was that I don't think people played nor understood that they were in a bigger game, or that it was a 1.5x or a 2x, you know, multiplier on top of, you know, whatever said the stake was. People would still buy in for their 100 bigs, which was really 50, and try to do the same shit. So the ante from a game selection perspective is a really powerful way to raise the stakes without people really knowing. So if for players who are running out of action, which is what the best players do, they're spread across all sorts of sites just trying to find good games to pop. Ante really is the future in that way. You can play bigger, under the radar in a really profound way, which is stick.
Mm-hmm.
So to talk about how Black Ops fits in with ante. So the river reports, so the way those work are we take a PO solve, PO river report, convert that, bucket it up, you know, into hand classes, textures, all this stuff. And then we produce a report that has effectively a heat map of which hand classes are betting how often, and the equity of each hand within there. What's really cool about PO is that you can set the tree to whatever you want, right? So ante games are new. People we already know are struggling to adjust them. What's really cool, so this first iteration of Black Ops, we're focusing on just traditional. We're about 3/4 of the way through getting all those reports run. Should have that done in about a month. What's really cool about the infrastructure of that is if I just build a really unique SPR, really unique ranges, I can just copy and paste, throw them in there, run the sim, run the report, convert it, and get uh, that information out to players in a very limited amount of time. Like if someone said, "Hey, I have a format you'll have never seen before for a 3-bet pot. I need river reports on 10 different lines within this. What can you do for me?" I will say, "Give me a week."
Mhm.
So for whether it be a future where we have a lot of overly standardized, anti formats, or we just get hit with a bunch of new ones, I'm really proud of the fact that I built this product in a way where I'll be able to support whatever unique anti structures come through to give post flop, really accurate post flop sims.
Let's do a value drop here for guys who don't quite understand how there's more margin in these ante games. I
Yeah.
want to talk about it in two ways. What we're about to talk about came from backroom conversations with quants that we contracted from outside of poker. Like, you were the first ones that really showed us, you guys need to start thinking about this in a bit of a different way. So like, I'm going to go through some pretty high level concepts here that I don't think have ever been talked about publicly. I hope what this does is give people a better understanding of the game they're actually playing, specifically if there is an ante on. So let's go back to the statement you made, which is that, simply put, if you're playing an ante game, you're playing a bigger game than you think you are. A lot of people might hear that and be like, what does that mean? That like we're playing deeper, or we're playing bigger pots? The simplest way to put it is you're playing a game where your standard deviation is higher.
Yeah.
You can go look at WPT Global. It runs at around 180 if you count the third blind as the big blind, which I think is the appropriate way to do it.
And for context, that is higher than the standard deviation of old school detox, which is overbet any chance you get. And it's really funny.
Anonymous ignition detox, where we were 4-betting napkins and just running that protocol into the ground. Standard, traditional standard deviation runs at around 100.
Yeah.
Sometimes even 90.
Yeah.
So you can already see WPT Global Gold maybe as well is running the same structure. They're running double. So if you talk to the quant will tell you that the appropriate way to picture what's happening there is that when you buy into a game that has 180 standard deviation, 180 big blinds actually plays like 100 big blinds. So that you're not getting as much bang for your buck, if you want to put it that way. Like, it doesn't, your buy-in doesn't go as far. It doesn't look like the game is bigger from a buy-in perspective.
Yeah.
It's just your 100 big blinds aren't what they seem. You would actually need 180 big blinds.
I've got to share a story real quick because it ties into this. So I was studying with a player. He's playing 2K bomb pots on ACR. So it's a 6-max bomb pot. Every player has 95 bigs in their stack because they've each contributed 5 bigs to the pot in the middle. Bomb pot, here we go. So SPR is about 3. So this means that for that game he was playing, where he's like, oh, I got 6 figures in my bankroll, I'll be okay. Since the big blind is 600, he's playing 60K and is buying in for 3 bigs a hand. Like, that's crazy. He had no idea he was playing literally 60K and doing micro short stack shots. That's how that game was even structured. So sort of tie that back to what you're saying about the quant, like, and it's like, well, really, you have this multiplier and the variance and all that. Like, this stuff is not intuitive. Like, and that this player he's unbelievable, top 100 in the world, and he did not know what game he was even playing from a stakes perspective. Which is, so there's a lot of edge here. I just had to hammer that. Like, the best in the world are messing this up. It's really hard.
It gets even cooler, though, because I think it connects back into why these warped ante games are actually so lucrative, popular.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of stuff going on here that's like worth unpacking. Let's go back to the example, because we discovered this when our guys started playing WPT for the first time. We saw like multiple 500 and L players have like 15K swings within like the first month. And we were like, what's going on here? Like, you're not supposed to be swinging. Like, that's a pretty anomalous event. like in the history of Detox, to have 3 players swing 30 buy-ins within a month at the same. So we started to look into the pool and we're like, okay, that makes sense because the standard deviation is almost double. If you go to the quant, what they'll basically say is, I'll give you the model that clicked for me because this is the first time I really understood what game we were playing. Let's just simplify this and say you have one game where there's 100 standard deviation, another game where there's 200 standard deviation, just so it's structured and simple. Okay. If you have a 10 BB per 100 win rate in the 100 standard deviation game, then you would effectively be playing the same game if you had a 20 BB win rate in the 200 standard deviation game. That is the same game. Same game in the sense that the way that it models, in terms of like the actual variance you will endure when your win rate increases linearly with standard deviation. That's a perfectly linear relationship. When I started to look at it this way, I was like, okay, now I'm starting to see why this matters, because take it to the extreme where like you've got, some of the agents who are servicing the Squid Games on the app side saying, we truly believe that there's 40 BB, 50 BB per 100 win rates attainable. That's happening for 2 reasons. It's happening because, well, the win rate part of it is happening because there's more skill edge in these games. But what's not said is that those games also have 40 or 50, 400 or 500 standard deviations. So even if you could have a 40 or 50 BB win rate, that's great. And over a long enough time horizon, that's fucking awesome for your bottom line. But you could still expect to endure the same type of variance because of the fact that it's 400 and 500 standard deviation. And win rate has increased linearly with standard deviation. But that doesn't mean you're going to endure less variance than you would in the 10 BB 100 standard deviation model. So understanding what game you're actually playing kind of comes down to this principle, which is pretty important. If someone asks you, what's your win rate? The correct answer is, what is the standard deviation?
I like that.
From a bankroll management perspective. And there's an important reason for this, is because if you talk to a quant, if you just tell him your win rate, he's going to be like, okay, I'm missing a big piece of calculating what he'll call your Sharpe, because a lot of people think win rate is just the bottom line, right? But without factoring in standard deviation, you know nothing about your actual investment, about the quality of the investment. So if you're talking to a quant, he'll be like, we define this strictly in terms of Sharpe, SHARPE, I think. Sharpe is basically strictly it's win rate divided by standard deviation. So a quant doesn't give a fuck what your win rate is. If he's assessing the value of your of the model you're investing in, at least, because he's concerned about what the volatility is that offsets your win rate and what that means for how robust the investment would be. And this is a huge deal. Because with infinite capital over an infinite time horizon, like, you're going to want the higher win rate. But a lot of these guys are misunderstanding how the standard deviation actually impacts the scope of a human sample. What does this bring up for you? Because I don't know if we talked about it at this high level, but like...
So for me, immediately, this brings up like a question, which is, who's the better player? The player who is a technical mastermind and then destroys his bankroll because he doesn't know what game he's playing, or the guy who is significantly less talented, but has done the work off the table and done the work, capital allocation, analyzing their games to say, this is what works for me. This is the huge risk. This is, higher margin, higher variance, and structures their portfolio appropriately. Because I think if you zoom all the way out, poker's an investment, right? Like there's different places you can put your money. You can put your money in a savings account, which is effectively zero risk and gets you almost no interest, right? You can buy stocks, which are significantly, higher risk. They can go way up or way down. And, S&P 500 performs, much better. The stock market tends to move up over time. So increases in risk and investment sense, or or one of the and I don't know who said this. I don't think I came up with it, but it was never accept additional volatility without additional return.
Yeah.
So the way the market makes up for where people can put their money, it's all a return on that capital, and then how volatile is it? Because and that just extends to poker.
The quant said once, one of them said, you would never really have much incentive to play a more volatile game if your win rate wasn't increasing with it. So you can put that in like very simple terms. So let's just pretend you had a 10 BB win rate and you could play the 100 standard deviation game, or you could maintain that 10 BB win rate, but you'd be playing 400 standard deviation. Well, it would be very foolish for you to ever play the 400 because it just basically means you're going to need a gigantic bankroll and you could go broke more often. And so what developed from this was a general internal thesis. It's not this strict, but the quants basically said you want games where your win rate is increasing relatively linear to standard deviation. And the reason they framed it that way is because they know if it's increasing perfectly linear, so you go from 10 BB at 100 to 20 BB at 200 to 30 BB at 300, that linear increase ensures you're playing the same exact game. The question is, how non-linear does it have to be for you to still have incentive to play that more volatile game? And that's where it gets really interesting, because it doesn't need to be perfectly linear. But the reason I think this is all important is because it goes back to the type of capital intelligence that you really need the people managing you to understand, so that you can bring them a situation, especially in a developing market, where you're like, dude, can you take a look at this? Because I have this opportunity to go play this game. And we could look at that in a second and be like, you might be you're probably massively underestimating the bankroll that you need for that. Or maybe this game's better and you should put more on this site because your Sharpe is actually higher over here relative to this game. These are decisions that I feel like Black Ops is qualified.
And that extends in-game too. So for example, I was playing a 5K game online, I think a couple days ago, and I had a spot where I had a theory bluff, I had good removal, and I chose to pass on it because it was a non-hot spot in MDA land. So it was one where the margin was going to be a few bigs, and I would be risking 50 bigs at a stake that doesn't run that often. It's tough to find good 5K games. So I said, this is 100% a plus EV decision. My time horizon for 5K, it's not like 1 year or 2 years. Those games run so infrequently. You're looking to get good samples there. You're looking at like 10 years. So as from a pure poker perspective, right, I could say like, okay, this is a plus EV bluff, I'm going to do it. But if I zoom out and say, how did these decisions impact my investment portfolio, and dropping my standard deviation in big spots for, marginal cost is a huge deal. So those are things that can factor. So not only does the capital allocation, analyzing your games, happen outside the game, it can and should inform your decision making in game. Right. So, but if that's at a smaller stake, right, and that I get lots of volume at, it's like, what am I passing up on a few bigs? What are we talking about? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's something that I think hurts. So not having this knowledge hurts guys that have a high risk tolerance. I think it hurts them more than guys who have a low risk tolerance. And I'm using low like pretty loosely there. I mean, like you're like a nit with your bankroll management. So I guess the important thing that I've taken away from a lot of the capital intelligence stuff we've done is that both the nit and the guy who's like the degen benefit from this knowledge. I would say the degen actually benefits more, but it's only because I think he has a higher ceiling, because he has a higher risk tolerance. And absolutely. I'm just calling him a degen loosely, so to make it an extreme thing.
Well, and I think that's valid terminology, and that's why coaching is so valuable. Like, so for players, if you're that guy who's like, I just want to focus on freaking making money, right? Like, that's where Black Ops can make a lot of sense. Cause like, cool, we'll do your, we'll look at your finances, we'll do the bankroll calcs, I'll talk to who we need to talk to and give you the portfolio. So then instead of that person having to think like, who would I even talk to about this network? Some guy gives you misinformation, some BS over there. And then it's like, all right, well, I guess I'm putting pen to paper. And maybe worst case scenario, you spend all that time and you don't get it right. Right? You don't know how to properly account for antes. You don't know about the scaling of variance and win rate that needs to be occurring, and you whoops it. Or you can say, with different models for coaching, right? It's like, or I can give up a profit split, and I can replenish that by focusing on what I do best, which is playing poker, implementing what I've learned, and I can let an expert give me a system that I know will scale and get me where I need to go. Then if you're a degen or a nit, it doesn't matter because you have a trusted professional who's saying, this is exactly how you should be moving your money. This is good. Either, it's the degen saying I'm not going fast enough, having the coach to say, this is perfect and you're going to be okay. And same with the nit. Like, I know you're playing bigger than you're comfortable with, but this is optimal. You're going to be okay.
The degen specifically has a really hard time wrapping his head around the Kelly model. Like Kelly is really the thing that should be taught in degen school, like right away. If you encounter a degen, and when I use this term, again, I'm using it like almost as a joke, but like really what I'm talking about is a fucking redliner beast who comes in and like clearly has no issue pulling triggers.
Yeah.
Like we used to hunt for these guys back in the day with PD recruitment because they're not that easy to find.
No.
If you can find one and reel him in, and by reel him in, I mean like tame him.
Yeah.
You have a guy with a really high ceiling. So like there's a couple guys on this team, I won't mention names, but on the old team, there are a couple guys that play really big and they've blown their bankroll like multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
And they just like, once they're back to zero, it's just like, okay, so we'll put them back on a makeup deal and they'll run it back up again until they're on their own, and they'll take a portion of their action and they'll take way too much of their own action relative to a Kelly model. For those of you who are not keen on what Kelly is, it's basically the model that determines whether or not you're using optimal bankroll management for the games that you're playing. And there's actually formulas. You can use full Kelly or half Kelly. Half Kelly is more conservative. Both are way better than what the degen does.
Yeah.
If you follow that model, Kelly, it basically states that over a significant enough time horizon, your bankroll will exceed anyone who does something suboptimal relative to Kelly or half Kelly. And so what the degen's always doing is he's ignoring the conservative nature of Kelly because it does look more conservative than what he's doing, like by a lot. And it's not all that intuitive either, because like what the degen doesn't see is he blows his roll and then he has all of this drag where he has to work his way back up to being able to have a shot again.
Yeah.
Kelly never makes that mistake.
Yep.
Like it's just a consistent chipping away, and it's just like a very mature model.
That's one of the elements too for the redliner at high stakes, and why passing on those spots in game can also be super important, because if you're out and have to rebuild and that whale sits, you just don't get that EV. So it's not the few bigs you're losing now, it's when, donk it off Danny shows up, right? And you could have taken that seat to his left and now you can't. That's the debilitating EV exchange of not knowing to pass on some of those spots. Another way that Black Ops really, really helps with guys with crazy high variance is we look at with the river reports, we can look at the profit margin of turning certain hands into a bluff, right? So as soon as you turn a hand into a bluff, you're entering a spike in variance, right? So one of my favorite examples of a place to not turn hands into bluffs is ace high button versus big blind. So ace high is very rarely a bet in theory, but it's at a really good clip, a hand that can be exploitatively turned into a bluff. However, the more equity your hand has, the lower the margin is that you gain exploitatively. So if you say the hotspot's 30%, if you bluff a hand with 20% equity, your margin's 10%, right? So is that 10% more worth ratcheting up the variance? Maybe not. But is your hand with 0% equity worth that full 30? That's a way larger margin, and it's way closer to what would fly under the radar. So I guess I'm going on a little bit here, but in addition, a lot of the things that redliners have struggled with is what even is a bluff. A bluff can, for me, is defined as a hand with lower equity than the hotspot, right? So if you get a lot of these really detailed river reports, something we saw too when we started working on a lot of hand class stuff and equity hotspot bucket, was people just were making a lot of polar errors. We'd see in database reviews, like, is this hand a value bet or a bluff? Because it is 50% equity. So being able to say, hey, dude, like, I know you love redlining. Those hands are not bluffs. And we can draw the line very clearly from what hands are bluffs and are not. So in addition to profit margin minded thinking for, hey, how worth it might this bet be, which I don't think it's coached very much. I think very much in game, it's like, did I make the right decision or the wrong decision, instead of this, investment frame being brought on into it. But so in addition to that sort of thinking, are these hands even bluffs? Even just being able to dial that down will really help the DJ and redliner.
Two guys come into the applications of this program. They're always going to be either on the passive or the aggressive side, the DJ redliner, or the guy who's looking to ramp his aggression up in a way that captures more than he's been able to.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to each of these guys upon entry, if you have to sort of paint the picture of the type of player they're going to be in a year after going through this program? Start with the DJ. Give me that transformation in as few words as possible, staying true to the efficiency of the engineering frame.
So I would say the same thing to both, which is, in Black Ops, we're not teaching styles, we're teaching optimal. So, because for each player, if you're too aggressive, you are playing, if you're betting a hand you're not supposed to, we can clearly map that and mark the mistake. If you're playing too conservatively, we can clearly map that and mark the mistake. We can pull up the theory, we can pull up the MDA, because for a lot of these things, there just is a right answer. We have sub profiles. We have, these are the exact pot capture considerations you want to have versus an over defender and an under defender, right? So if the redliner, we'll probably have different leaks to patch. The redliner will probably be blasting into an over defender. And I'll say, here's the data. This is objectively wrong. This hand is a check. This is a standard slowdown. Or for the person who struggles to bluff, hey, this is a spot you should have bluffed. Here's, the pot capture value. This is math. This isn't how you feel about it. It's going in there, understanding the margins, and doing the thing. So whichever side you fall on, the way the course is structured, there are data-driven right answers for pretty much all the spots. So it's, do you want to play? You're going to be learning how to play optimally. That's what I would tell both players.
It's the reproducibility of MDA that I think drew me to it originally. I think you've taken it to another level in terms of layering it with almost a career consulting on top, which I think is a lot of what capital intelligence ends up being. If we boil it down, it's like, we can look at how current decisions that you're making are going to affect future events that you can't even see, because you have unknown unknowns in your current framework. And so, even the type of thing, like, most guys know this, like, it's a simple one. If you battle versus a reg at a heads up table, you better be doing that because fish tend to show up.
Yep.
So, like, that's level one of this. But I think we've talked about, like, sort of a meta layer of this, where it's like, you don't even know the impact that not allocating your capital on these sites is having on your overall annual earnings. Like,
I have such a passion. It's also, I love this stuff. Another thing too is so I'm big on poker etiquette, also as a huge source of EV. So as an example, there's a player who's been going around some of the regulated pools, and what he will do is, so before a table starts, before table starts, it is anonymous who's sitting at the table. And generally, fish will not join a game unless they see someone sitting at the table. So a player who has a very strong heads up background, really good at heads up, what he will do is as soon as someone sits, he will join the table. They'll play two hands. That player will leave and he will leave. And then he's just going to prey on the next guy. So this is a player who has clearly studied heads up, clearly very good at heads up, and is like, this is how I'm going to make my bones. What he is missing is that the highest EV thing you can do online is hold a table, because when a fish sits, you are guaranteed the seat. So the value of learning heads up online isn't in playing heads up online. It's being guaranteed that seat with the whale when he sits 5K, because how many seconds do you have when the fish sits? It's like that. Sometimes it's faster than a few seconds. So the element of, not only allocating capital, but what's my edge? What's the EV of the edge? And then zooming out to things like investment strategy, or even how am I conducting myself on a site? Those are all huge elements of edge.
Huge levers.
Yes.
Tell us when Black Ops is launching. The day of this recording, I don't know, July 21st?
We're going to launch the first of next month. So
August 1st, we open the doors.
Yep.
Applications are coming through the Access network. If you're already in the private network, you'll see this first. We may release this publicly, open up a few spots for guys who aren't in the network yet. There's probably some MDA lovers out there who would be a great fit for this, so we wanted to make it a bit more available. For those of you who are interested in applying, if you're inside the Access server, all you have to do is message Cam. You'll see his name, Access Cam. He'll jump on a consult with you and talk it through. If you are seeing this on a public platform, follow the instructions below to reach out. It'll probably be some type of application form where we will pre-qualify you. And if your results and general approach is in alignment with this course, Cam will reach out. We'll set up a consult that way. Access Cam, probably the most interesting engineer I've ever worked with in terms of just you being so multifaceted, player, coach, architect, and this capital intelligence layer, which I think is just kind of blowing it wide open and nobody's talking about it. So really grateful to have you on. We may do so much for not doing strategy today.
I don't think I can help it. I just love it. It's so much fun.
We might go deeper in another one. So this might end up being a 2-part thing. Until then, August 1st, we're opening doors. We're only taking 12.
Yep, only 12. It's so important to me that the players that I'm taking, I can give enough attention to, whether it be to, get them acclimated to resources. Bankroll management stuff is also time consuming. And it's very important for me that whoever gets into this program, that they're getting my effort, they're getting the value, and that I have them in a spot where they can grow. This isn't something where we're taking a huge amount of people. Here's the strategy. Good luck. This is very intentional career building.
It's one of the reasons I wanted to sponsor you for this, was because I saw what you did with culture coming up through PD. You were the most engaged coach we've ever had. I mean, you basically transformed culture on your rise from small stakes to high stakes. You're a 2K NL player now, shooting 5K whenever it runs.
Yeah.
when it runs. I just wanted to throw that in at the end because, honestly, I wouldn't be putting you on this way if you weren't a coach who was also as interested in staying engaged on the ground. I see you sort of as a Caesar, in the sense that you're in battle with the guys every day and you're on the ground making sure that everybody is connected and talking, mainly talking.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that's not there, then I think the program is lacking a lot of natural accountability. Coach needs to be on the ground, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And like we said earlier, people are the sum of the time they spend the most time with. And for me, it's important that people are getting time with their coach. It's why we're going to do weekly office hours and bi-weekly lectures. And by the same token, I also like to be surrounded by people who, like having that strong network. So in a sense, this is also just a scheme for me to have some of the best study partners on the planet. The goal of the container is that, it's very intentional career building. It's getting everyone to the next level, and that we just become this absolute powerhouse as a unit.
August 1st, Access Cam. Reach out through the instructions. We'll set up a consult. We'll figure out if it's the right fit. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.